I think the new Valhalla epilogue has two distinct purposes. The first is to force Kratos' character to face the sins, mistakes, and wrongdoings of his past that have been overlooked by the story so far. There were 6 games in the series prior to the Norse duology, 6 games of violence and bloodshed and carnage. The point of these new scenes in Valhalla is to take a thoughtful and serious look at his past actions and ask questions like, what does the new Kratos have to say about these? After all the growth he's gone through, how does he feel about them now? Which of these were justified and which were not? Which are more complicated than they first appear on the surface? Is there anything Kratos has done in his past which is truly unforgivable? So terrible that he should be barred from a position of authority in the Norse pantheon, which is of course the catalyst of this epilogue. Freya has offered Kratos a position in the new Norse pantheon. She has offered him his old role of God of War. This is a big deal. Kratos was only the official god of war in Greece for a very short time, and it did not end well. He has been a rogue god ever since. Freya is offering him an official position of authority, command, leadership, and power. He will decide the rules of war in Midgard and beyond. He will rule over mortals. However, Kratos does not believe himself worthy of that position yet. Despite all his growth, all the good he has accomplished so far, he still thinks those past failures are too terrible to allow him to accept such an offer. The second purpose of this epilogue is to recontextualize Kratos' past, to change the rhetoric surrounding it, to not only change how Kratos the character feels about it, but I think the writers actually want to change how we, the audience, talk about his past. The way people usually describe Kratos' story goes a little something like this. As a young man, Kratos was violent and short-tempered. He accidentally killed his own family, purposefully killed off most of the Greek pantheon, and incidentally killed a lot of innocent people along the way. He was a monster. But then he left that life behind, became a father again. He tried to be a better man for the sake of his son. Through self-reflection, hard work, discipline, and making more thoughtful choices, Kratos became a force for good in the world. In Valhalla, the writers don't want to literally rewrite that story, they want to complicate it, which is what good fiction does. Good fiction doesn't tell stories about black and white, villains and heroes. Good fiction tells stories about complicated people making complicated choices in complicated situations. The writers want to take a serious look at Kratos' past and say, hey, maybe this isn't as simple as people describe it as. Maybe his story is a lot more complicated than we're giving it credit for. The main story of Valhalla focuses on 4 events in Kratos' past: the Chamber of Sacrifice, his choice to pledge himself to Ares, the death of Helios, and the opening of Pandora's box. I know that Valhalla does examine a couple other events in his life too, and there's some stuff going on with Mimir as well, but I'm going to save a discussion of those for a shorter follow-up video. For now, I'm going to focus on just those 4 events, because those were the ones the writers themselves wanted to bring attention to. So let's begin with the Chamber of Sacrifice. Okay, so way back in the original God of War on the PlayStation 2, during Kratos' quest to destroy Ares, the Greek god of war, he journeyed to Pandora's temple, which protected Pandora's box, which supposedly contained the power to kill a god. Pandora's temple was a giant labyrinth dungeon strapped to the back of a titan, full of traps and puzzles and challenges and monsters. Very Zelda-ish, super cool. It's still probably my favorite location in the entire series. Someday I'm going to do a full retrospective on the original God of War, because it's still a really good game that I think a lot of newer fans of the series missed out on, but moving on. One of the rooms within Pandora's temple was called the Chamber of Sacrifice. An innocent Athenian soldier is locked in a cage here, and he asks Kratos to free him, but Kratos does not do that. Instead, he says, "The gods demand sacrifice." And then you have to push the cage up this incline while fighting monsters and stopping the cage from falling backwards, and it's kind of a pain in the butt, to be honest. And the entire time, the soldier is begging for his life, saying, "Please don't do this. Please don't kill me. Please let me go." But Kratos does not let him go. He pushes the cage all the way to the end of the corridor, where the soldier is burned alive. Kratos doesn't react to this death in any way whatsoever, he just doesn't seem to care at all. In hindsight, it was a pretty horrific moment, so horrific that Sony actually altered this sequence in the European release. If you played God of War in Europe, when you reached the Chamber of Sacrifice, you just burned an undead zombie instead of an innocent living man. This moment is also representative of the often callous and brutal violence of the original trilogy. This is just one of many examples in which Kratos casually murdered an innocent to further his own quest for revenge. In Valhalla, Kratos is confronted with the Chamber of Sacrifice again, and I want to watch a little of that scene together. And as you watch this scene, I want you to think about something. Ask yourself, does Kratos' reaction demonstrate growth? Does he show us how he has changed with his new choice? Okay, here it is.
You're really just going to incinerate me and see what happens? I swear, you haven't changed one solitary...
Brother? What am I doing in here?
Over here. Over here.
What's that?
No!
Get me out of here! Brother! What is this? Help me!
I'm trying!
Brother! Please! Please!
So the answer is no. Kratos does not demonstrate any growth here at all. When presented with an old problem, he makes the exact same choice now as he did back then. Once again, he chooses to brutally sacrifice the life of another to further his own path. Now, in Kratos' defense, this obviously is not the real Helios. You know, because Helios is already dead. This is merely a product of Kratos' memory mixed with the magic of Valhalla. He's not actually sacrificing a real living and breathing sentient creature, and he knows it. I do think that if this was the real world, and that was a real person in that cage, Kratos would be much more hesitant to pull the lever. With that said, it's still surprising to me how quickly he resorts to callous and casual violence again. Then the writers do something really smart. At the last moment, they replace Helios, someone we don't really care about and probably dislike, with Mimir, someone that both Kratos and we care very deeply about. The purpose of this switcheroo is to give both Kratos and the audience the experience of losing someone we care about to this kind of casual and thoughtless violence. The point is that the Athenian soldier back in the original God of War was someone else's Mimir. He was someone's son, someone's father, someone's friend. Someone called him brother too. As much as we love Mimir and as devastated as we would be if he was killed here, especially if he was murdered as thoughtlessly as Kratos killed that soldier, someone else was just as devastated by that soldier's death. And that goes for every single innocent person whose life Kratos casually threw away during his quest for vengeance. They all had someone who cared about them. It's not just about the people Kratos killed, it's about the families he destroyed, the trauma he inflicted on entire communities. In a small way, Valhalla gives Kratos the experience of that trauma when it tricks him into placing someone he cares about into the Chamber of Sacrifice. The next time Kratos reaches Valhalla's recreation of the Chamber of Sacrifice, Kratos places himself inside the cage, so after already experiencing the emotional pain he inflicted, he can now experience the physical pain of it too. This self-flagellation serves as a small act of penance that allows him to move on to Valhalla's next trial. Next, Valhalla confronts Kratos with his choice to pledge his life to Ares, the event which set this entire series into motion. Everything that has happened in all of these games directly occurred as a result of that choice. Kratos views that choice as his greatest mistake, and of course he does. It directly led to the death of his wife and daughter. all the pain and suffering and tragedy and slaughter that followed. But here the writers are going to complicate that choice, examine it from all sides, both the positive and negative outcomes. But before we get to that, let's review the story. Way back, a long time ago, when he was a young man, Kratos was a military captain of the city of Sparta. He was an extremely successful commander, undefeated in battle. These victories filled him with pride. He became consumed by an ever-growing hunger for more battle, more slaughter, more glory, and more fame. Finally, his quest for glory led him to disaster. He and his army faced a massive horde of ruthless barbarians. For the first time as a general, Kratos lost a battle, but he refused to lose. At his most desperate moment, he called out to Ares, pledging his life to the god of war in exchange for victory. Ares answered his call, binding Kratos to his service and providing his new servant with the power to defeat the barbarians. In his service to Ares that followed, Kratos transformed into a true monster, a merciless killer, barely human. Okay, so then how does Valhalla complicate this choice? Well, let's watch it together. Here it is.
Fools. It's not only memories.
Indeed. For what is a memory apart from our perspective on it? You know the evils that came of your path. You know the evils within yourself. Yes, these you dwell on. But it's not that simple, is it?
The horde is vast, brother. What would have happened if you didn't stop it?
Our lands would have been overrun. Our people killed, violated.
People your army was sworn to protect. An army led by you. Did you not feel a duty to fulfill your purpose? Did you not fear for the safety of your homeland? You saved them.
You would excuse my actions.
Excusing them is not the exercise, Kratos. Only accepting them. Accepting that you acted based on what you knew then, not on what was to come. Your motivation and their consequences are far more complicated than you let yourself believe.
Something I really like about the writing here is the way that it very explicitly refuses to excuse Kratos for the wrongs he's done. Just because there were some positive results of his choices doesn't erase the negative consequences. I've seen some players say that Valhalla is rewriting his story, trying to make it seem as if Kratos was a good guy all along. And that's just not true. These scenes are really clear about what they're trying to do, which is to understand Kratos' past choices as complicated as they really were. And these characters are right. The barbarian army was dangerous. They would have rampaged and looted and burned the Greek lands. Would they have done more damage than Kratos himself eventually did? Well, maybe not. But based on the information Kratos had at the time, pledging himself to Ares and stopping the barbarians was the right thing to do. And by the way, pledging himself to Ares was not a moral wrong. All Ares did was give him power. It was up to Kratos how he chose to use that power. There's a moment in Valhalla when Helios points out that Kratos is still using the Blades of Chaos, which he received from Ares. Helios suggests that there is some contradiction here, that Kratos can't be truly repentant of his service to Ares if he is still benefiting from that service. But the Blades of Chaos are merely an object of power. In the present, Kratos uses that power for good. There would be no sense in throwing away that power just because of its tainted origins, especially if it can still be used as a tool to forge a better world. Pledging himself to Ares was not the mistake. It's what he chose to do in that service that was the mistake. Kratos always could have said no. He didn't have to obey all of Ares' most heinous commands. He always had a choice, even if refusal would have meant his own destruction. And Kratos still has a choice now. Making a new choice will not erase his past wrongs, but a new choice can still make a new world. Personally, I would rather be led by a leader who has made the worst possible mistakes and learned from them than by a leader who has never made any mistakes at all. Mistakes are valuable. Mistakes can make people better. But I'm digressing here. Let's get back to Valhalla and the next event in Kratos' past we're going to examine together. Next is the death of Helios, which resulted in the disappearance of the sun in Greece, which was really just one among many disasters that befell Greece as a result of Kratos' quest for revenge. Okay, so back in God of War 3, Kratos tore through Mount Olympus, slaughtering one Greek god after another, all in a quest to kill Zeus, who, to be fair, probably did deserve to be killed. Zeus was evil. How much the rest of the Greek pantheon deserved death is a matter for debate. But regardless, every time Kratos killed a god, it had consequences for everyone in Greece. When he killed Poseidon, tsunamis and floods destroyed coastal settlements. When he killed Hera, all the plants died. And when he killed Helios, the world was shrouded in darkness. As Kratos himself says in Valhalla, he knew what the consequences of killing the gods would be. He knew it would hurt innocent people too, and he did it anyway. He did not care about those other people. To me, this has always been Kratos' greatest sin. As much as I loved the story of God of War 4, one criticism I have is that it spent so much time agonizing over the killing of his father Zeus, as if that was the worst thing Kratos ever did. But as far as I'm concerned, killing Zeus isn't even in the top 10 of the worst things he ever did. Again, Zeus was a tyrant. He deserved to die. The world is better off without him. But it's all the innocents that got caught in the middle that bothers me, especially since Kratos never even tried to do anything to prevent their suffering. That's the real crime here. So I really appreciate that here in Valhalla, the writers are finally trying to address this. Now let's see how they try to navigate this dilemma. Here it is.
I don't think you were indifferent, Kratos. I think you were hurt. Deeply hurt. And you handled it unskillfully.
Wait, is that you restoring the sun? You took Helios' chariot and put the sun back in the sky, but sacrificed yourself in the process.
Yes, I fell to my death and was saved by Helios. But this memory happened before I killed him. My evils were yet to come. What is the point?
That your legacy has always been a complicated one. That goodness is not a destination we arrive at, but a practice. Misfortune may drive anyone to darkness. We resist it only through wisdom and vigilance. You are not so unskillful now as you were then. Better voices in your head, you might call it.
This is my favorite scene in Valhalla. In some ways, I do have to admit it is a bit unsatisfying. Kratos' act of destroying the sun, the suffering he inflicted on so many innocents, those wrongs still feel unresolved to me. The fact that Kratos once saved the sun too doesn't absolve him in any meaningful way. In the writer's defense, I don't think there's anything they could have written here that would have somehow magically fixed or reversed his mistakes. In spite of what Faulkner says, the past is also still the past. It is set in stone. Kratos' past actions cannot be changed, and these ones were particularly terrible. However, I really love how the writers shifted the conversation here, how this becomes a discussion about what it really means to be good. Goodness is usually described as a state of being, meaning that either someone is good or they are not. An action is either good or it is evil. The writers of Valhalla have a different description though. They say that goodness is a practice, a skill, and so someone is either well practiced or they have more work to do. An action is either skillful or it is unskillful. I don't think this is intended as a way to excuse Kratos' past mistakes. Like, did you kill thousands of innocent people? Well, don't worry about it. You're not bad. You're just unskillful. Lacking skill in this context is the same as doing wrong, but it's meant to be a more hopeful description of right and wrong. If goodness is a skill, that means it is something we can work on. If we've made mistakes, if we've done something wrong, if we've hurt someone, that doesn't mean we're stuck being that person forever. We can work on it. We can practice this skill. Just like any other skill, with time, dedication, and study, we can get better at this. And I think that is a beautiful idea. I'm really grateful to the writers for this because I've never heard it expressed in quite that way before. I think there's a lot of value in this. Alright, let's move on to the fourth and final event in Kratos' past that we will examine, the opening of Pandora's box. This is actually my least favorite plot element in the original trilogy. Alright, so in the first God of War game, Kratos sought Pandora's box because it supposedly contained the power to kill a god, which he used to kill Ares. However, unbeknownst to Kratos, though probably known to Athena, who was guiding him at the time, the box also contained evil. This evil was then unleashed upon the world and infected the gods. It's actually the evils of the box which caused the gods to become selfish and greedy and murderous. I was always very frustrated by this reveal. Like, imagine if in Ragnarok, you got to the end of the game and you discovered that Odin was not a manipulative, murderous bastard as a result of his own choices, but just because someone opened a box somewhere. And otherwise, Odin would have been a pretty cool guy. Wouldn't that be an unsatisfying reveal? I vastly prefer a villain who is a villain because of the choices they made, rather than some random circumstances outside their control. Sometimes people try to fix this by saying that Zeus and the other gods were already flawed. The evils of the box just magnified those flaws, so it was ultimately still Zeus's choice to betray his son, not just the box's fault. Anyway, that doesn't really matter here. What matters now is that in his carelessness, Kratos opened that box, accidentally infected the gods with magical evil, and in doing so made the world a much worse place. Okay, so let's see how the writers deal with this one.
When the evils of the box were purged, what remained was hope, which you chose to release back to the world.
Yes. After everything, you came back full circle to sacrificing yourself.
My death would have been just, but it was not to be.
Yes, you lived, and hope still lived inside you, from that day to this one. One might say you brought hope back to these realms after a long slumber. Box or no box, Kratos, hope and fear and love and hate exist in every one of us. The question is, which will you choose to let guide your actions? Each choice we make shapes our world.
Pandora's box did not only contain evil, it also contained hope. A hope that Kratos carried within himself and then released back into the world at the end of God of War 3 by sacrificing his body. I have not discussed Kratos' choice to sacrifice himself at the end of God of War 3 much on this channel before. To be honest, that's another plot point in the original trilogy I find frustrating, because there's a lack of specificity here. The term hope is so vague. What exactly was Kratos releasing back into the world? What actual measurable effect did it have on the world? I tend to focus on the carnage and slaughter he wrought in that game, because the effects of those are much easier to see. But it's clear that the writers want us to take this idea of unleashed hope seriously, and so we should. Kratos' sacrifice at the end of God of War 3 is undeniably heroic. In fiction, heroism is often defined by sacrifice. Heroes almost always sacrifice something. Things they care about, things that are important to them, their time, their safety, their health. This is considered noble and right. Fictional heroes are constantly giving up their lives to save innocents, to save their friends, to save loved ones, to save the world. And that's the kind of sacrifice Kratos makes at the end of God of War 3. Once again, it doesn't erase all the wrong he had done, but it does complicate his character in a really important way. way. With this decision, the writers of God of War 3 were trying to turn Kratos from a shallow, violent murderer into a character with more layers. A character who, at least once in his life, chose to put the welfare of others before himself. And here, the writers of God of War Ragnarok are drawing attention to that complexity. Kratos was always at least somewhat of a complex character, if maybe not quite as developed as he is nowadays. That choice back then is what made it possible for the writers of the Norse games to build him into the Kratos of the present. Anyway, to end this video, we need to move on to the final scene in Valhalla. Valhalla concludes with Kratos directly confronting his younger self. I know a lot of us probably hoped this would involve an actual boss fight against his younger self, which would have been awesome. But this scene is still fantastically written, so let's watch it together.
What can I say to you? I remember how it felt to take that throne. All that it meant. And all that it did not. A god of war. A god of pain. Of suffering. Of destruction. And no one said I chase redemption that I know I can never deserve. What does that make me? God of fools. A god of... hope. When all else is lost. You lost everything. And everyone. You became... There is no forgiving you. You chose! I chose. But now, should I, this same man, should I sit, take, proclaim, lead, place myself in service? In service? Should I lose everything and everyone? There's to be enough left inside so that I do not become you. I do not know. But I have hope. You are cruel and arrogant and selfish. But you are more than that. You have always been more than what others saw. You are more than that.
Well, looks like I missed everything. Did you find what you needed? Glad to hear it, brother. We're done here then, so, what now?
Now, I believe I would like to sit here for a while.
Something worth pointing out here is that the stories of the last two games have focused on a lot more characters than just Kratos. They've been about Kratos and his son, about Kratos and Freya, about Freya and her son, about Freya and her brother, about Freya and Odin, about Odin and Thor, about Thor and Thrud, about Thrud and Atreus, about Atreus and Sindri, about Sindri and Brock, about Brock and Kratos, about Kratos' relationship to the world around him. The stories are these interconnected web of relationships, so many relationships and so many characters. The narrative focus has been ever so gradually drawn away from Kratos himself. It's become a story about all these other characters, which is great, because all those other characters are extremely compelling too. But in Valhalla, finally, we have a moment to sort of slow down, to zoom in, to focus, to get all those other characters off the screen for a while, and let this be a story about Kratos again. A story about Kratos and Kratos. A story about who he is now and who he used to be. That's what this scene is all about, giving him that opportunity for some extended self-reflection. This might be one of my favorite scenes in the entire series, because it's one of the rare times where we get to hear Kratos' thoughts out loud. Kratos so often keeps his thoughts and feelings locked away within himself. He's very careful about not revealing himself. Instead of saying what he thinks, most of the time he just grunts. But here, in this scene, what we're getting is interiority, a glimpse at his interior self, those parts of himself he usually keeps hidden. What Kratos is doing here is what I like to refer to as emptying his pockets. When a character empties their pockets, they are letting it all out. Their hopes, their fears, their innermost thoughts, their motivations, their feelings, everything. They are digging down deep and showing us what they have hidden. And I love these sorts of moments. I think they're extremely important to give the audience a chance to really learn who that character is. So, what are Kratos' innermost thoughts? Well, in many ways they are conflicted and contradictory. He is angry with himself, frustrated with himself, feels beyond forgiveness. With that line, "you chose," he is refusing to give himself any excuse for his actions. He's not going to say, well, I lost everything, so what else could I do? I felt angry and hurt, so what else could be expected of me? I was manipulated, so it wasn't my fault. I didn't know what the consequences of my choices would be. Kratos is not going to let himself hide behind those excuses. But when you strip away all those excuses, what does he have left? Is he just a monster then? Is he just unforgivable? Notice when Kratos switches the subject of the sentence, when he goes from saying "you chose" to saying "I chose." And at the same moment, the camera moves so that only the present-day Kratos is still in the shot. A lot of times we do talk about Kratos as if he is two different characters. There is violent past Kratos, and then there is benevolent present Kratos. But Kratos is still the same person, not meaning that he hasn't grown or changed, but that he hasn't stopped being Kratos. He has not stopped being the same person who did all those terrible things, which he acknowledges with, "Should I, this same man, should I sit?" Next, that line, "Should I lose everything and everyone? Will there still be enough left inside so that I do not become you?" This is a fascinating line, so let's break it down. Okay, so in the past, Kratos lost everything. He lost his wife, his child, his home, his humanity, everything. And then he became a monster. But Kratos has gained a new family, new friends, new allies, a new home. All those people have influenced him. Their influence lives inside him. This is what he and Atreus discussed back in Helheim. It's what Tyr meant in the previous scene when he mentioned better voices. Here, Kratos is wondering, if the worst came to pass, and I lost everything again, if I lost Atreus, and Mimir, and Freya, and this new home, would I become a monster again? Like, we just saw what happened to Sindri when he lost Brock. Kratos just saw an example of how fragile these relationships are, how easily and how quickly it can all vanish. Does Kratos have enough of his new family's positive influence inside him to prevent himself from becoming a monster again, if he lost them all again? And in the end, Kratos does not have an answer. He doesn't know the future. He can't be certain about who he will become tomorrow, but he chooses to hope. Earlier, he quoted a line, something Pandora said back in God of War 3, "Hope, it is what we fight with when all else is lost." A bit ago I asked, when you strip away all of his excuses, what does Kratos have left? Well, it turns out all he has left is hope. He chooses to believe in the better part of himself, in his ability to be more than his flaws, more than his mistakes, in his ability to be better, to make better choices, which in the end is all any of us can do. All of us want to be better, or at least all of us should want to be better. And to get there, in the very least, we have to believe in our ability to be better. That is a form of hope. I found Valhalla to be a really beautiful coda to Kratos' story. I have wondered if we would get a glimpse of Kratos' next adventure in Valhalla, and it turns out that Kratos is going to be staying here in Midgard for the foreseeable future. He is going to take a position of authority. He is going to choose to believe in himself, in the possibility of the best version of himself. I don't think we're going to see any more of Kratos for a long time. I think it's possible, though definitely not certain, that this is the last story we may ever see with Kratos as the main character. And if so, this was a very satisfying conclusion to this character's story. If this really is the end of Kratos, then this is as good an ending as any fan could hope for.